Hello, everyone. I am the sleep storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax. The stars shimmered like scattered diamonds above the forbidden forest, their light barely piercing the dense canopy below. A hush settled over the ancient woods, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Fen, a centaur of formidable stature, stood atop a moss-covered rise, his keen eyes fixed on the sky. The constellations had shifted into an alignment not seen in 1,000 years, a celestial omen whispered of in prophecy, and feared even among the wisest of magical beings. The heavens spoke of awakening, of forces long dormant stirring once more. Behind him, the rhythmic pounding of hooves signaled the gathering of his kin. They emerged from the shadows, their eyes reflecting the eerie glow of the wandering wisps that flitted between the towering trees. The prophecy speaks true, Fen murmured, his voice heavy with the weight of ancient knowledge. The time has come. The elemental magic stirs once more. His words sent a ripple of unease through the herd. The return of such power would not go unnoticed. There were those who would seek to control it, others who would seek to destroy it. At that very moment, in the heart of Hogwarts, Headmistress Minerva McGonagall sat upright in her study, a sudden chill prickling the air. Before her, 4 ancient artifacts, long thought to be mere relics of the past, reacted to an unseen force. A crystal chalice overflowed with endless water. A brass brazier erupted in golden flames. A silver wind chime rang out in the absence of any breeze, and a stone sphere lifted itself from its pedestal, spinning lazily in midair. The portraits of past headmasters stirred, their painted eyes shifting with knowing unease. Dumbledore's portrait, his expression calm but watchful, murmured softly, "So, they have finally arrived." The children of the elements, as the sun rose over the castle, bathing the turrets in hues of gold and amber, students began filing into the great hall for the start of term feast. Amid the chatter of excited first years and the warm greetings exchanged between old friends, 4 students sat at their respective house tables, unaware of the power that lay dormant within them. Marcus Flamel, a Gryffindor with a lineage tracing back to the legendary alchemist, tapped his fingers nervously on the wooden surface, unaware of the tiny sparks that flickered between them. At the Hufflepuff table, Flora Sprout, great niece of the famed herbology professor, shifted uncomfortably as the very stone beneath her feet seemed to pulse in response to her presence. Stella Lovegood, daughter of Luna, sat among the Ravenclaws, her silvery blonde hair lifting in an invisible wind that affected no one else. And in Slytherin, Alexander Greengrass watched in confusion as his goblet of pumpkin juice froze solid, despite the warmth of the great hall. McGonagall observed them closely from the staff table, her mind tracing back to to an ancient verse etched into the very foundations of the school. A prophecy written in the hand of Rowena Ravenclaw herself. When the millennial star returns to its crown, 4 shall arise with powers profound, air and earth, fire and sea. In their unity, magic's guardians be. But beware the shadows that hunt their light, seeking to bind their power in endless night. Autumn settled upon Hogwarts, painting the castle grounds in hues of gold and russet. But with the change in season came an unsettling shift in the air. Strange occurrences whispered through the halls. The great lake froze over at random intervals, only to thaw within moments. Sudden windstorms sent books and parchment flying through the corridors. In the dungeons, minor tremors rattled the stone walls, shaking potions from their shelves. Fires flickered to life in empty classrooms, their flames dancing to an unseen rhythm. The faculty convened in an emergency meeting, their concern growing. We must train them, Professor Flitwick insisted, his tiny hands gripping the edge of the table. Their powers are manifesting faster than we anticipated. McGonagall, though grave, nodded in agreement. But before any plan could be enacted, the first attack came. On a storm-laden night, under the cover of howling winds and relentless rain, dark-robed figures breached the castle's outer defenses. Cloaked in shadows, they moved like wraiths, their presence sending shivers through the very stones of Hogwarts. At their helm was a woman with eyes like Arctic ice, her voice cutting through the storm as she strode through the entrance hall. "We are the Reapers of Magic," she announced, her words amplified by unseen forces. "Surrender the elemental children, and your school will be spared. Resist, and we will tear these walls down stone by stone." Instead of fear, resistance burned within the students and staff. McGonagall's heart swelled with fierce pride as she watched her school rise to defend itself. The 4 elemental children, though still untrained, had been practicing in secret under the guidance of their heads of house. And now, for the first time, they stood together. Marcus's hands blazed with controlled fire, illuminating the hall in flickering gold. Alexander, his eyes narrowing, summoned moisture from the very air, forming jagged shards of ice that hovered menacingly at his fingertips. Flora's connection to the earth caused the very flagstones beneath the intruders to shift and buckle. Stella, her face calm as the eye of a storm, commanded the air itself, lifting the Reapers' weapons from their grasp. But the Reapers were prepared. With a flick of their wands, they cast ancient spells, dark enchantments designed to bind elemental magic. The air grew thick, heavy with malevolence. The children faltered, their powers wavering against the oppressive force pressing down upon them. Then something extraordinary happened. As they instinctively backed toward one another, their magic began to intertwine. Marcus's flames spiraled into Alexander's ice, creating steam that hissed and curled in tendrils of mist. Flora's earth rose in jagged pillars, guided by Stella's wind, forming an impenetrable barrier between them and their enemies. The Reapers' leader snarled in frustration, her spells shattering against this unexpected unity. "Impossible," she spat. "The elements cannot work in harmony. It defies the natural order." "No," McGonagall corrected, stepping forward, her own wand alight with protective magic. "It fulfills it. The founders knew this day would come. Why do you think they created 4 houses, yet placed them under one roof? Unity in diversity. That has always been Hogwarts' greatest strength." A fierce battle raged through the halls, light clashing against darkness, the echoes of spellfire reverberating through the castle. But in the end, the Reapers faltered. The elemental magic, wild yet perfectly balanced, was too much. As dawn broke over the castle, the last of the invaders fled into the forbidden forest, pursued by centaurs who had silently joined the fray, led by Fen himself. The 4 stood together in the courtyard, exhausted yet triumphant, their powers settling into a harmony that felt as natural as breathing. McGonagall looked upon them with pride, knowing this was only the beginning. The prophecy did not speak only of their awakening, but of the trials yet to come. As magical creatures emerged from the forest, bowing their heads in silent homage, and the sun's golden light bathed Hogwarts' ancient towers, she knew one thing with certainty: a new chapter in magical history had begun. The halls of Hogwarts still trembled from the battle's echoes. The Great Hall, usually a place of warmth and celebration, bore the scars of the conflict. Scorch marks from Marcus's flames streaked the stone columns. Ice shards left behind by Alexander glittered like fallen stars upon the floor, and the very earth itself had shifted, causing fractures in the ancient flagstones where Flora had called upon her power. Above, the enchanted ceiling reflected the fatting storm, dawn breaking through with streaks of gold and crimson. McGonagall stood at the head of the room, surveying her students. The Reapers had been forced to retreat, but the danger had not passed. The 4 children, their clothes still dusted with the remnants of their magic, stood before her, barely comprehending what they had just accomplished. Stella's silver hair still floated slightly, caught in a breeze only she could feel. Marcus's fingers still smoldered faintly, the embers within his magic not yet extinguished. Alexander clenched his jaw, his breath visible in the cold air that surrounded him, while Flora ran a hand over the fractured stone, feeling the heartbeat of the castle itself. "They will come again," Professor Flitwick said, breaking the silence. His normally bright eyes were dark with concern. "And next time, they will be prepared for the children's strength." McGonagall nodded. "That is why we must act now. They must be trained. Their power is bound to Hogwarts itself, but without guidance, it will consume them." She turned her sharp gaze upon the 4. "You will not only learn spells and charms, you will learn yourselves. Your abilities are unlike anything this school has seen in centuries. If you are to survive, you must master them." The weight of her words pressed upon them. Marcus, ever the Gryffindor, squared his shoulders and lifted his chin. "Then, let's start now." Alexander frowned, his Slytherin caution surfacing. We need to understand why the Reapers want us in the first place. They were waiting for us, prepared with counterspells. They knew what we could do before we did. Because of the prophecy, Flora murmured. It didn't just speak of our powers. It spoke of shadows hunting us. They knew we would come. Stella, quiet until now, exhaled slowly. Then, it means they know more about us than we do. McGonagall's lips thinned. Not for long. That very night, a secret training regimen began. The room of requirement had transformed itself into something ancient, something primal. A vast open field stretched beneath an ever-changing sky, storms rolling over distant mountains, the golden light of sunrise bathing the far edges in warmth. In the center of this ethereal world stood 4 pedestals, each one carved with ancient symbols. Professor Flitwick led Marcus to the first. Fire is will, untamed and unpredictable, he explained. You must learn to control its hunger, to temper it with wisdom. Strength without control is destruction. With a flick of his wand, he summoned a flickering sphere of flame and set it before Marcus. Focus. Do not just command the fire, understand it. Marcus reached out his hands, and the flames leapt eagerly to his touch, curling around his fingers like a living thing. He gritted his teeth, pushing, shaping only for the fire to flare uncontrollably, bursting outward in a wave of heat. He gasped as Flitwick waved his wand, extinguishing the rogue sparks before they could set anything ablaze. It will not obey you because you demand it, Flitwick chided. It is part of you. Do not force it, listen to it. On the opposite side of the room, Professor Sprout knelt beside Flora, pressing her hand to the stone pedestal. Earth does not bend. It endures, it breathes, it listens. Feel it. Flora closed her eyes, sensing the pulse of the ground beneath her palm. At first, there was nothing but silence, but then a whisper, a vibration deep within the stone, like the heartbeat of something ancient and vast. She inhaled, pushing her magic outward, and the ground trembled in response, a small flower blooming in the cracks of the pedestal. She smiled. In the farthest corner, Professor Vector observed Stella, who stood before a tall, silver pillar that hummed with the energy of wind. Air is freedom, Vector said, but it is also precision. A storm is powerful, but the slightest breeze can change its course. Master that balance. Stella held out her hand. The wind responded immediately, swirling around her fingers. She willed it to rise, to form a controlled vortex, but it slipped from her grasp, shifting in unpredictable patterns. She sighed in frustration. It won't listen. Vector smiled. Because you are not giving it direction. Air is the most fickle of elements. It seeks, it wanders. Do not demand guide it. At the final pedestal, Professor Snape's portrait observed Alexander with a critical eye. Water adapts, Snape's voice echoed from the enchanted frame. It changes, it finds its way. It does not fight, it endures. Alexander stared at the basin before him, filled with water so still It reflected his face perfectly. He reached out, tracing the surface with his fingers. Instantly, ripples spread, the water rising in thin streams toward his hands. He furrowed his brow, trying to mold it, but it slipped through his grasp, returning to stillness. "Do not hold it," Snape advised. "Become it." The hours stretched into days, and the days into weeks. The training was grueling, pushing them beyond their limits. Marcus learned to calm his fire, summoning warmth rather than destruction. Flora could now feel the earth beneath her with such clarity that she could predict an opponent's movements through the vibrations of their steps. Stella had learned to shape the wind, directing it as a bow directs an arrow. And Alexander, after countless failures, learned to let go, to allow the water to move as it willed, shaping itself in response to his intention rather than his force. As the first snowfall of winter dusted the castle's towers, McGonagall gathered the four once more in her office. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something akin to pride in her gaze. "You have made great strides, but your true test still awaits." The fire crackled softly, casting shadows against the stone walls. A single owl sat upon the windowsill, silent and watchful. "What test?" Marcus asked warily. McGonagall turned, retrieving an ancient scroll from the shelf behind her. It was bound in silver thread, its parchment aged but unbroken. Slowly, she unrolled it, revealing inked symbols that shimmered with magic older than Hogwarts itself. "This," she said, "is a map, not of a place, but of a path. The founders left it for those who would come after them, those with elemental magic." Stella leaned forward, her breath hitching. "Where does it lead?" McGonagall met their eyes. "To the source of your power." The room fell into silence. Outside, the wind howled against the castle walls, as if carrying a warning. Somewhere in the forbidden forest, hooves pounded against the frozen ground. The Reapers had not been idle in their defeat. They, too, had begun their own preparations, and the shadows were moving once more. The candlelight flickered against the aged parchment, illuminating the shimmering ink of the map. The four students leaned in, their breaths quiet, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the ancient magic woven into the scroll. The symbols shifted slightly, rearranging themselves into something more decipherable, as though they sensed the presence of their rightful readers. McGonagall's voice was steady, but laced with caution. "This is the path of the Founders, a journey meant only for those who wield the elemental gifts. It is said that at its end lies the source of your power. But no one has attempted this path in over 1,000 years. Its dangers remain unknown." Marcus's fingers traced the map's markings, his touch causing faint embers to glow along the edges of the parchment. "If this can help us understand our magic, then we have to go." Alexander narrowed his eyes. "And walk straight into something we don't fully understand. We barely survived the Reapers last time." Stella exhaled, the air around her fingers swirling in response. "But we We don't have a choice, do we? If we don't master our abilities, the next attack could be our last. Flora's hand rested on the table, grounding them all. Then we do this together. McGonagall studied them for a moment, her gaze lingering on each of them in turn. Then, with a nod, she reached for her wand and tapped the map twice. The ink shimmered again, and suddenly the castle around them seemed to shift. The four gasped as their surroundings blurred and reformed. No longer were they in McGonagall's office. They stood now at the base of an ancient archway deep within the Forbidden Forest. The air was thick with magic, the ground beneath their feet pulsing faintly, as if the very earth recognized their presence. The sky above them was veiled in thick mist, yet despite the cold, Marcus could feel warmth radiating from the stones. The path has begun, McGonagall's voice echoed faintly, though she was nowhere to be seen. This trial is yours alone. A sudden rustling in the trees made them turn sharply. From the shadows emerged a centaur Fen, his eyes like liquid silver under the moonlight. You have entered the domain of the Founders. Trial, he announced. Only those worthy shall pass. Alexander's jaw tensed, and if we fail, Fen's gaze darkened. Then your magic will consume you. A shiver ran through them. Fen stepped aside, revealing 4 separate paths leading into the darkness. The first trial is one of solitude. You must walk alone. Marcus swallowed hard, exchanging a glance with the others. The idea of separating now, after everything, felt wrong. But before any of them could protest, the ground beneath them trembled, splitting into 4 distinct paths, each carrying them forward, as if the very forest had willed it. The warmth turned into unbearable heat as Marcus stepped forward. The trees around him blackened, turning to cinders as embers rose from the ground like fireflies. A voice, ancient and commanding, filled the air. Fire is destruction. Fire is chaos. Can you wield its hunger without being consumed? A sudden roar split the air. From the flames stepped a monstrous figure, a beast of molten rock and burning eyes. It lunged toward Marcus, the ground beneath it melting into rivers of lava. Marcus's instincts screamed at him to attack, to unleash the fire within him. Flames leapt from his hands, colliding with the beast. But the creature only grew stronger, feeding off his power. Fire cannot fight fire. Marcus gritted his teeth. He closed his hands, cutting off the flames. Instead, he breathed deeply, remembering Flitwick's words. Do not command, understand. He focused not on destruction, but control. The fire within him settled, reshaping itself. Instead of attacking, he directed it inward, forming a barrier between himself and the creature. The beast roared, shrinking as its own power was reflected back at it. The heat faded, the flames dying down. When Marcus opened his eyes, he was standing in front of a single burning brazier. The voice whispered once more, You have learned restraint. Fire is now yours to wield. The brazier flickered, and then he was gone. Flora's path led her into a deep cavern, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and stone. The walls around her pulsed as if alive, and ahead, a vast chasm yawned, endless and dark. A voice rumbled through the cave. Earth is steady. Earth is strong. But what happens when the ground beneath you crumbles? The path collapsed. Flora barely had time to gasp before she fell, plunging into the abyss. She reached out desperately, her fingers brushing against the rock walls, but there was nothing to hold on to. Then instinct took over. She closed her eyes, reaching not outward, but inward to the very core of the earth itself. She did not fight the fall. Instead, she called upon the stone, willed it to recognize her. The air around her thickened, slowing her descent. The rocks shifted, rising up beneath her feet, forming a bridge where there had been nothing but empty air. When she landed, solid ground greeted her. The chasm was gone. Before her stood a great stone monolith, humming with power. You have learned trust. Earth is now yours to command. Monolith pulsed, and then she was gone. The moment Stella stepped onto her path, the ground beneath her disappeared. She was falling soaring through an endless sky, wind tearing at her clothes, her hair whipping around her face. Panic gripped her chest. A whisper curled through the air. Air is freedom. But can you control the storm, or will it carry you away? Winds howled, forming a vortex around her. The sky darkened, lightning flashing in the distance. She flailed, trying to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing to hold. Her breath came fast. She had always controlled air through small gestures, subtle movements. But this was chaos. Then realization dawned. She was not meant to hold onto the air. She was meant to become part of it. She stopped struggling, letting the wind carry her. Instead of resisting, she moved with it, guiding her descent. The storm did not control her. She controlled the storm. The winds calmed. A single silver feather drifted toward her, glowing softly. You have learned trust. Air is now yours to shape. Feather touched her hand, and she was gone. Alexander stepped forward, and the world became the sea. Waves crashed around him, dragging him under, the weight of the ocean crushing against his chest. He struggled, kicking, gasping for air, but the water did not yield. A voice whispered through the depths. Water adapts. Water changes. But will you fight the tide or become one with it? He fought, reaching for the surface, but it slipped farther away. His lungs burned. His vision blurred then. His mind cleared. Fighting would only drown him. Instead, he let go, surrendering to the current. The water cradled him, lifting him gently. He was not drowning. He was floating. The tide carried him forward. You have learned acceptance. Water is now yours to wield. The waves receded, and he was gone one by one. They reappeared at the archway, gasping, their bodies trembling from their trials. They looked at one another, something different in their eyes. They had changed, and their journey was only beginning. The cold night air wrapped around them as they reappeared at the archway, the lingering echoes of their trials still pulsing within their bodies. Their breath came in ragged gasps, their limbs trembling not from exhaustion, but from the overwhelming realization of what had just occurred. They had been tested, broken, and reshaped by their elements, each forced to confront their deepest fears. And yet, they had emerged stronger. Marcus clenched his fists, still feeling the warmth of fire coiled within him. No longer a raging inferno, but a steady, controlled ember. Flora's connection to the earth had deepened. She could feel every shift beneath her feet, the heartbeat of the world thrumming in her veins. Stella inhaled slowly, the air responding to her presence, lifting her weight ever so slightly, as if ready to carry her at a moment's notice. And Alexander, where once his power had been rigid, ice forming in jagged bursts, it now moved like a river, fluid and effortless. Fen, the centaur, stood waiting. He studied them with eyes that glowed silver in the moonlight. "You have passed the first trial," he acknowledged, "but you are far from ready." Marcus exhaled sharply, still catching his breath. "There's more." Fen nodded. The founders did not entrust their legacy to the unworthy. Power without wisdom is destruction. Strength without unity is weakness. You have proven your connection to your elements, but now you must prove your connection to each other. Stella furrowed her brow. "We fought together before. That should count for something." "It is not enough to fight together," Fen replied. "You must become one. The elements cannot stand alone. They exist in balance, or they collapse into chaos." Alexander crossed his arms. "And how exactly do we prove that?" The centaur turned, pointing toward a break in the trees, where a narrow path wound deeper into the forbidden forest. "Beyond this point lies the second trial, the trial of unity." His voice grew solemn. "You will not face it as individuals. You will either succeed together or fail together." A cold wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a whisper of something unseen. The shadows between the branches stretched longer than they should, moving in unnatural ways. Flora shivered, pressing a hand to the earth to steady herself. Something was waiting for them. Marcus glanced at the others, determination flickering in his gaze. "Then, let's go." Without another word, they stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the second trial. The moment they entered the clearing, the air thickened, the space around them warping as though reality itself had been bent. The trees faded into mist, and the ground beneath them changed. No longer solid earth, but a shifting, endless void of swirling colors. Stella gasped, reaching out instinctively, but there was nothing to hold on to. "Where are we?" "A space between," Fen's voice echoed, though the centaur was nowhere to be seen. "A realm where only the bonds you share will guide you." Marcus turned sharply, searching for a way forward. "What does that even mean?" As if in response, the ground beneath them fractured. The four were torn apart in an instant, the void swallowing them whole. Marcus landed hard, the impact sending a jolt of pain through his ribs. He groaned, pushing himself up, only to realize that Alexander had landed beside him. They were alone, surrounded by an endless expanse of scorched ground and towering flames that reached toward a storm-ridden sky. Alexander exhaled sharply, ice forming at his fingertips as he tried to counter the heat. But the flames only grew stronger. "Great," he muttered. "Fire and ice, just our luck." Marcus wiped sweat from his brow. "This has to be part of the trial. We have to figure out how to work together." A deep growl rumbled through the air, and from the flames emerged a creature of molten rock, its eyes burning with furious energy. It roared, sending a wave of searing heat toward them. Instinctively, Marcus summoned fire to his hands, ready to fight. But Alexander grabbed his wrist. "Don't," Marcus scowled. "Are you seriously telling me not to use fire against a lava monster?" Alexander narrowed his eyes, stepping forward. "Flames only grow stronger when you feed them. We don't fight it, we smother it." Of attacking, Alexander called upon his power, but instead of sharp ice, he pulled water from the very air, forming a thick mist around them. The flames flickered, struggling against the sudden drop in temperature. Marcus realized what he was doing and adjusted his magic, controlling his fire rather than unleashing it wildly. He focused on absorbing the heat instead of releasing it, allowing the flames to cool into embers. The creature let out one final roar before it collapsed, its molten form hardening into solid stone. The world shifted. The fire vanished, and the two of them were no longer standing in the scorched wasteland. Instead, they found themselves back in the misty void, their surroundings unchanged. A voice whispered around them, "You have learned balance." Then they were gone. Flora and Stella had landed in an entirely different realm, an endless sky, the ground beneath them, a floating island of stone and moss. A howling wind tore through the space, and in the distance, a massive storm churned black clouds, swallowing the horizon. Flora dug her heels into the ground, steadying herself. "Wind and earth," she murmured. "This is our trial." Stella lifted her hands, trying to summon control over the air, but the storm resisted, whipping against her violently. "It's too strong," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "Every time I try to push back, it just gets worse." Flora placed a hand on the ground, focusing on the stone beneath them. It was crumbling, barely holding together against the wind's fury. "Because you're trying to fight it alone." She took Stella's hand, pressing it to the ground. "Wind needs something to guide it. Air alone is unpredictable, but when it moves with the earth, it creates harmony." Stella hesitated, then nodded. She adjusted her stance, no longer trying to push the wind away, but instead guiding it, allowing it to move in the way Flora directed. The storm began to shift, the winds no longer wild, but focused. The stone beneath them solidified, no longer shaking. As the storm calmed, the mist around them swirled, and the sky faded back into darkness. A voice whispered around them, "You have learned unity." Then they were gone when the four of them reappeared in the clearing. They staggered slightly, their bodies still adjusting to the weight of their trials. But something was different. The connection between them had deepened. They looked at each other, no words needed. They had passed. Fen stood before them once more, a a rare flicker of approval in his gaze. "You are stronger now," he acknowledged. "But there is one final trial." The forest trembled. The ground beneath them seemed to exhale, the shadows stretching as if something beneath the earth had awakened. Fenn's voice lowered. "You have learned control. You have learned unity." Stepped aside, revealing a new path, one shrouded in darkness. "Now, you must face the enemy that seeks to claim your power." And the final battle was about to begin. The shadows ahead pulsed, thick and heavy, like a living entity waiting to consume them. The path was no longer simply a trail through the forest. It had transformed into something far older, something unnatural. The trees on either side twisted impossibly, their gnarled branches curling toward the darkness like grasping fingers. The four stood still, their breathing shallow, their senses heightened. They could feel it, an unseen force coiling around them, testing their resolve. Ven, the centaur, remained at the threshold, his silver eyes unreadable. "Beyond this path lies your final trial," he said. "The Reapers have already begun their move. They know you are here," clenched his fists. "Then let's not waste time." Fen lifted a hand, stopping him. "This is not a battle of brute force. The Reapers are not mere wizards. They are something else entirely. They do not seek to kill you." His gaze darkened. "They seek to take you." A shiver ran through Stella, and she wrapped her arms around herself. "Take us? How?" Fen hesitated. "Their leader, Morgana Dreven, has uncovered magic older than Hogwarts itself. Magic that allows her to bind the elements to her will. If she succeeds, you will no longer be yourselves. Your power will belong to her, and the balance of magic will be shattered." Flora took a slow, steadying breath. "Then we stop her." Ven studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "Then go, and do not falter." The four stepped into the darkness together. The moment they entered, the world shifted. The path vanished beneath their feet, replaced by a vast, endless void of swirling mist and fractured shadows. Time and space seemed to bend, stretching into infinity. The air was thick with magic-tainted magic, warped and unnatural. A whisper slithered through the space around them. Asterisk, asterisk, come to me. The voice was feminine, cold and commanding, yet strangely soft, like silk brushing against the skin before it tightened into a noose. Marcus reached for his fire, but the moment he summoned it, the flames flickered unnaturally, turning a sickly shade of blue before vanishing entirely. "Something's wrong," he hissed. Alexander narrowed his eyes. He lifted his hand, calling water from the air, but the moisture turned to black mist before he could shape it. "Our magic, it's being absorbed." Stella's breath hitched. "She's already trying to take it." Mist around them swirled violently, and from its depths, figures emerged cloaked in tattered black robes, their faces obscured by masks resembling hollowed skulls. Their very presence exuded a suffocating aura, as if they were voids in the fabric of existence itself. The Reapers had arrived. One of them stepped forward, tilting its head unnaturally. A voice, twisted and layered with echoes, slithered from behind the mask. "You are not yet complete, but you will be." Took a step forward. "Yeah, over my dead body." The Reaper let out a soft, eerie chuckle. "No, not dead. Changed." The mist surged forward, asterisk, asterisk. The battle for control asterisk. The attack came without warning. The mist exploded outward, engulfing them in an unnatural force that clawed at their skin, their senses, their very magic. The reapers moved like shadows, their forms flickering, shifting between solid and incorporeal. Marcus swung his arm, summoning fire once more, but the flames curled uselessly, devoured by the oppressive energy surrounding them. Alexander tried to summon ice, but it shattered the moment it formed. "They're suppressing our elements," Alexander shouted, dodging a bolt of dark energy that streaked past his shoulder. Stella turned sharply, eyes scanning their surroundings. "No, they're corrupting them." Flora gasped as she felt the earth beneath her tremble, not in response to her power, but against it. The ground cracked, and from the fissures, dark tendrils slithered outward, twisting around her ankles. She struggled, but the more she fought, the tighter they became. Flora, Marcus moved toward her, but a reaper intercepted him, striking out with a burst of shadowy force. He barely managed to dodge in time. A chilling laugh echoed through the void. A figure stepped forward from the mist. Unlike the others, she wore no mask. Her face was pale, her black hair sleek, and cascading down her back like a river of ink. But it was her eyes that sent ice through their veins, silver like the moon, yet empty, devoid of warmth, Morgana-driven. "The prophecy never spoke of you as warriors," she mused, her voice smooth as glass. "You were never meant to fight." Her lips curled slightly. "You were meant to join me." She lifted her hand, and the mist surged toward them, wrapping around their limbs, their throats. It was suffocating more than just physical. It was something deeper. Their magic trembled, resisting, but weakening. A cold realization settled upon them. She wasn't just trying to capture them. She was trying to rewrite them. Marcus's vision blurred. The fire inside him flickered, but instead of warmth, he felt something else, something invasive. The flames turned blue again, and for the first time, he felt them slipping from his control. No, he clenched his fists. His fire was not hers to take. Through the haze, he heard Stella's voice, faint but determined. "Don't fight her, not with force." Her words rang in his head. She was right. They had spent so long thinking of their elements as weapons. But they weren't weapons. They were part of them, not something to be wielded, but something to be trusted. With that realization, Marcus did not summon fire. He became asterisk fire. The flames within him roared back to life, not the corrupted blue Morgana had tried to impose, but golden, brilliant, pure. Heat surged through his veins, not burning, but alive. The mist recoiled from him. Morgana's expression darkened. "Clever boy." Beside him, Stella did the same. She did not force the wind to answer her, it simply did. Swirling around her like an extension of her own breath, Flora exhaled, releasing her grip on the earth, not commanding it, but feeling it. It responded instantly, the tendrils that had ensnared her breaking apart. Alexander closed his eyes. He no longer shaped the water. He let it flow. And it came to him, their magic was not something Morgana could steal, because it was them. Morgana's lips pressed into a thin line. Then I will unmake you instead." The shadows around them surged, twisting into something monstrous. But the four stood together, their magic intertwined, no longer separate forces, but one. Marcus's fire burned away the mist. Stella's wind redirected the darkness. Flora's earth stabilized the ground beneath them. Alexander's water swallowed the shadows whole. For the first time, Morgana took a step back. The reapers faltered. McGonagall's words echoed in Marcus's mind. Unity in diversity. That has always been Hogwarts' greatest strength. The four of them raised their hands, their elements converging into something greater, a force that was not fire, or water, or air, or earth, but magic itself. Asterisk, Morgana's eyes widened. Then, with a blinding flash of golden light, the void collapsed. When the mist cleared, they were standing in the forbidden forest once more. The reapers were gone. Morgana was nowhere to be seen. The battle was over, or so they thought, because as the last echoes of shadow faded, a whisper lingered in the air, curling like smoke. Asterisk, this is far from finished. Asterisk, the wind howled through the trees as the four stood in the clearing, their chests heaving, their magic still humming beneath their skin. The battle had ended, but the weight of what had just happened lingered like an unseen presence in the air. The reapers had vanished, their leader, Morgana Dreven, consumed by the golden light of their combined power. But none of them dared to believe it was truly over. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow, his fingertips still warm with lingering embers. Did we just win? Stella's silver hair lifted slightly, caught in an unseen breeze. She turned her gaze to the sky, where the last wisps of Morgana's darkness had dissipated. "I don't think she's gone," she murmured. "Not completely." Flora knelt, pressing a hand to the earth. Forest had quieted, but beneath the soil, she could feel a tremor faint but steady, like something waiting beneath the surface. "She left something behind," she whispered. Alexander's expression darkened. His magic was water, fluid and knowing, and in the air around him, he could still sense something unnatural, something out of place. "She didn't just vanish," he said grimly. She retreated. A sharp rustling in the trees made them all tense. Instinctively, they shifted, falling into a defensive stance. But instead of shadowy figures, a familiar form emerged from the darkness. Fen. The centaur's silver eyes reflected the moonlight, unreadable as he approached. He surveyed them, his gaze lingering on the scorched ground where Morgana had last stood. "You have done what many could not," he said at last. "You have held back the reapers. You have denied Morgana her victory," exhaled, relieved. "So we did win." Fen's gaze flickered toward him. For now, a heavy silence fell over them. "The reapers are not like ordinary foes," Fen continued. "They are shadows born from the oldest of magic, from secrets buried long before Hogwarts was even a thought. They do not die in battle. They wait. They learn." His voice grew grave. "And Morgana is patient." The words sent a chill through them. Flora clenched her fists. "Then, what do we do now?" Fen turned his gaze toward the sky. "You must understand the power you wield. The magic of the elements has been dormant for 1,000 years, but it was never meant to be contained. The founders left a path for those like you, not just to use this power, but to master it." Alexander frowned. You mean the map, Fen nodded. The path you took was only the beginning. He gestured to the forest, where a narrow trail had appeared between the trees, as if the land itself had shifted to reveal it. There is one final place you must go, the heart of magic itself. The four exchanged glances. They had fought, they had survived, but something told them their true test had not yet come. Marcus rolled his shoulders, fire flickering behind his eyes. Then, let's finish this. Without another word, they stepped forward into the unknown. The forest swallowed them in darkness. The path was narrow, winding deeper into the heart of the forbidden forest than any of them had ever ventured before. The air here was different, thick, heavy, with an energy that pressed against their skin, humming beneath their feet. There was no bird song, no rustling of leaves, only silence. As they walked, the trees around them changed. Their trunks became smooth, silvered, as if carved from moonlight. Their leaves shimmered, whispering in a language none of them could understand. Flora ran her fingers along the bark of one of the trees, her pulse quickening. "This isn't just the forest," she whispered. "This is something older." "It's magic," Stella murmured, eyes wide. "Pure magic," Marcus hesitated. Then, why does it feel like it's watching? Sudden gust of wind rushed through the clearing ahead, parting the trees to reveal a massive structure hidden in the mist, a temple. It stood in the center of an ancient glade, its walls carved from the same silvered stone as the trees, glowing faintly with an inner light. The air around it pulsed, thick with magic. The entrance was framed by 4 towering pillars, each inscribed with runes none of them recognized. At the center of the temple's doors, an emblem had been carved into the stone. A circle divided into 4 equal parts: flame, water, earth, and air, interwoven in perfect harmony. "This is it," Alexander murmured. "The source of our magic." Flora exhaled. "Then, let's go." They stepped forward as one, crossing the threshold of the temple. The moment they entered, the air shifted. The torches along the walls burst to life, their flames glowing an unnatural shade of blue. The stone beneath their feet vibrated, alive with some unseen force. The temple's walls stretched high above them, covered in shifting glyphs that glowed and pulsed like living things. At the center of the vast chamber stood an altar, and upon it 4 ancient relics. A chalice, its surface shimmering with water that never spilled a brazier, burning with an eternal flame. Stone, smooth and round, humming with the weight of the earth. A silver chime, ringing softly despite the still air. The artifacts, Stella breathed. The founder's relics, stepped forward, staring at the brazier. "These belong to them," Fen's voice echoed through the chamber, though he was nowhere to be seen. "No," he said, "they are them." A stunned silence fell over the 4. "These relics are not just tools," Fen continued. "They are the last remnants of the Founder's power, the very essence of their magic, sealed away so that it could be passed to those who were worthy." Looked down at the stone, feeling a pull deep within her chest. "Then this was always meant for us," Alexander exhaled. "Then what happens when we take them?" Fen's voice darkened. "Then you will awaken what has long been waiting." Before they could react, the temple trembled, the blue flames flickered, turning red. The The air grew thick with pressure, the walls groaning as if something immense had shifted beneath them. A voice, deep and ancient, echoed through the chamber. Asterisk, asterisk, you have come far. Asterisk, asterisk, the shadows in the corners of the room began to move, coiling into a singular form. A figure emerged, tall and faceless, its body composed of swirling darkness. Its presence pressed against their very souls, a weight that threatened to crush them. Asterisk, asterisk, but only one power may remain. Asterisk, asterisk, Marcus's pulse pounded. What does that mean? Fenn's voice was barely a whisper. Morgana has found you. Figure lifted its hand. The darkness surged forward. The final battle had begun. The temple trembled. The darkness surged toward them, moving like a living thing, tendrils of shadow twisting through the air with unnatural speed. It wasn't just Morgana, it was something more. Something vast, something ancient. A force that had been waiting, slumbering, until now. Marcus barely had time to react before the shadows struck. Instinct kicked in. He threw up his hands, summoning fire. But the moment his flames met the darkness, they were swallowed whole, devoured as if they had never existed. The air turned thick. Heavy, Stella gasped, stumbling back as the wind around her faltered. Alexander clutched his throat, as though struggling to breathe. Flora dropped to one knee, pressing a hand to the stone floor. But even the earth felt distant, slipping from her grasp. Their magic was vanishing. The figure stepped forward, its form shifting like smoke, towering over them. Its voice was not loud, yet it echoed in the depths of their minds. Asterisk, asterisk, your power is borrowed. It does not belong to you. Asterisk, asterisk, Morgana's presence was within it, but she was no longer alone. This thing, this entity, was far older, far greater. She had become its vessel, and through her, it now spoke. Asterisk, asterisk, there is no balance, no harmony. There is only the void. Asterisk, asterisk, a pulse of shadow erupted from the figure. Slamming into them, the world twisted. Asterisk, asterisk, the illusions of fear. Asterisk, asterisk, the temple dissolved around them. The four were no longer standing together. They were nowhere at all. Each of them found themselves alone, trapped in an illusion woven from their deepest fears. Asterisk, asterisk, Marcus. Asterisk, asterisk. He stood in an empty battlefield. The sky above him burned red, the earth beneath his feet scorched and lifeless. He turned and saw bodies. Hogwarts lay in ruins, the castle shattered, its towers broken. Students and teachers alike lay motionless, their bodies consumed by fire. His hands shook. Flames flickered at his fingertips, wild and untamed. No matter how much he tried to pull them back, they grew stronger, hungrier. You were never meant to control it. The voice came from behind him. He turned sharply to see a figure standing in the embers. A man, tall and broad, with dark eyes and a weary expression, his own reflection. You think fire can be contained? The other Marcus asked. You think you can master something that was made to destroy? Marcus's breath hitched. The fire within him surged, wild and consuming. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. Fire was destruction. But it was also asterisk light, asterisk, asterisk. He took a breath, closed his eyes, and instead of trying to stop the fire, he let it become part of him. When he opened his eyes, the flames had settled, controlled. A golden ember, steady and warm, the illusion crumbled. Asterisk, flora, asterisk. She stood in an empty field, but the ground beneath her feet was wrong. It was cracked and dry, lifeless. The trees around her were dead. The flowers wilted. Her earth was gone. She fell to her knees, pressing both hands to the ground, trying to feel its presence. Nothing. A voice, soft and mocking, echoed in the wind. You are nothing without it. She looked up and saw her own face staring back at her. But this version of her was pale, hollow-eyed, and surrounded by nothing but dust. You thought you could control the earth, the other flora whispered. It was never yours to command. It is older than you, greater than you. And without it, you are powerless. A pit formed in Flora's stomach. The earth had always been her foundation, her anchor. But here, there was nothing. Or was there, she inhaled, closing her eyes. The ground may have been lifeless, but she was still here. Earth wasn't just what she stood on asterisk. It was what she carried asterisk within asterisk. Her heartbeat, her breath, her strength the moment she realized it. A spark of green pulsed beneath her palm. The illusion shattered. Asterisk, Stella, asterisk. She stood in an open sky, the wind rushing around her. Yet she couldn't move. She was falling. No matter how much she struggled, she couldn't summon the air. She had always felt it, always guided asterisk it. But now it was gone, and below her an abyss. A voice drifted through the storm. Without the wind, you are nothing. She turned and saw herself. A version of her, standing calmly in midair, arms crossed. But her eyes were empty, her expression cold. You thought you were free, the other Stella said. But you were only ever a leaf in the wind. Panic clawed at Stella's chest. The ground was coming closer. She was running out of time. Then she remembered wind wasn't about force. It wasn't about asterisk control, asterisk. It was about asterisk trust, asterisk. She closed her eyes, stopped fighting. And in that moment, the wind caught her. The illusion shattered. Asterisk, Alexander, asterisk. He stood in the middle of a frozen sea. The water around him was solid ice, stretching endlessly in every direction. The cold was unbearable. He tried to summon water, but it was frozen beneath his feet. He reached for the moisture in the air, but there was none. A voice whispered through the cold. You were never meant to bend the tide. Turned and saw his own reflection in the ice, staring up at him. You think you can control the water, the other Alexander sneered. You are just another drop in the ocean, and when the sea swallows you, no one will remember your name. Alexander clenched his fists. The ice around him was thick, unyielding. Then he exhaled. Water was not meant to be forced, asterisk. It was meant to asterisk flow, asterisk. He knelt, pressing a hand to the ice, and instead of fighting it, he welcomed it. A single crack formed, then another. The ice shattered. The temple came rushing back. The four of them gasped, their bodies shaking. The illusions had lasted only seconds, but the weight of them felt like an eternity. They turned toward the figure, the shadows that had tried to consume them. And for the first time, they saw Morgana falter. She hissed, her voice shaking. You should have broken, met her gaze. And for the first time, he wasn't afraid, asterisk. No, he said, stepping forward. We're stronger than you. Stella joined him, her silver hair floating in a wind that was now hers. Flora placed her hand against the stone, the earth rising at her command. Alexander's breath curled in the air, water forming at his fingertips. The four of them turned toward the altar, where the founder's relics still rested. They had proven themselves, they had faced their fears, and now it was time to claim their destiny. The relics began to glow. Pulsing with golden light, Morgana let out a scream, her form twisting, unraveling. The darkness tried to consume them once more, but this time it failed, because their magic was asterisk no longer separate asterisk asterisk. It was one. With a final pulse of power, the golden light erupted outward, swallowing the temple in brilliance. The shadows vanished, and Morgana Dreven was no more. The silence that followed was absolute. The battle was over. But what had they just awakened? The relics still pulsed in their hands, humming with something ancient, something waiting, something new. The world would never be the same again. The temple stood in silence. The shadows were gone. Morgana Dreven had vanished into the abyss, her presence erased by the golden surge of magic that had erupted from the relics. But even as the darkness faded, something new stirred in its place. The relics pulsed beneath their hands, warm and humming. No longer just objects of power, but something more alive, aware. Marcus tightened his grip around the brazier, its flames flickering softly. "We did it," he breathed, half in disbelief. Flora, her palm pressed against the smooth stone relic, exhaled shakily. Then, why does it feel like something not finished? Because something was. A deep tremor ran through the temple floor. The ancient carvings on the walls flickered, glowing brighter, their runes shifting as if awakening from 1,000-year slumber. The torches along the walls burned golden now, casting long shadows that stretched and wavered unnaturally. Alexander turned to Fen, who had remained silent throughout the battle, his silver eyes unreadable. "What's happening?" The centaur stepped forward, studying the relics with a mixture of awe and caution. "You have proven yourselves worthy," he murmured. "The relics have chosen you." Stella felt the silver chime in her grasp vibrate softly, its melody filling the air like a whisper of wind. "Chosen us for what?" Fen's gaze darkened. "To become what the founders once were." Silence fell. Marcus's heart pounded. "You mean?" Fen nodded. "You are not just wielders of elemental magic. You are its guardians." The words sent a shiver through them. Flora traced the smooth edges of the stone relic, feeling the weight of something far greater than herself pressing against her spirit. But the founders, Rowena, Godric, Salazar, Helga, they weren't just elemental mages. They were something more. They were the first to bind their powers together, Fen said. Not to rule, but to protect. The relics are not mere tools. They are the heart of magic itself, forged from the very essence of the elements. And now, his voice was solemn. "They are bound to you." The air in the temple grew heavier. Marcus swallowed hard, gripping the brazier tighter. So what happens now? A sudden pulse of energy answered him. The temple trembled violently, and before anyone could react, the golden light surrounding them expanded, rushing outward, spreading through the walls, through the earth, through the very fabric of the magical world. And in that instant, everything changed. Across the wizarding world, Hogwarts, within the castle walls, the enchanted ceiling of the great hall flickered, then burst into a brilliance unseen for centuries. The ancient banners of the four houses shimmered, their colors deepening, their magic rekindling. The castle itself seemed to exhale, its very foundations responding to the energy surging from the forbidden forest. Portraits stirred in their frames, whispering in urgent, forgotten languages. The ghosts of Hogwarts paused in their wandering, their translucent forms flickering with sudden awareness. Deep in the dungeons, the Chamber of Secrets, sealed for generations, rumbled, its serpent-carved walls vibrating with something ancient and watchful. The world was waking up. The Ministry of Magic, far below the main floors, in the deepest chambers of the Department of Mysteries, the great hourglass of magical equilibrium, an artifact studied by unspeakables for centuries, began to glow. The sands within shifted in chaotic patterns, as though time itself had shuddered. Seers across Britain gasped in unison, their visions colliding, splintering into 1,000 new futures. The balance of magic had been rewritten. The forbidden forest, the centaur herd stood at the forest's edge, their silver eyes turned toward the temple. The stars above them pulsed, aligning in a pattern not seen in a millennium. The cycle has begun anew. An elder centaur whispered. His kin said nothing. They only watched. Back in the temple, the energy surrounding the four began to settle, but the feeling it left behind was undeniable. Something was different. Stella's fingers trembled as she clutched the chime. "I can feel it," she whispered. "Everything, it's connected now." Flora nodded, her own senses overwhelmed by the sheer presence of the earth beneath her. "It's like the magic isn't just around us anymore. It's within us," Alexander finished. Marcus's breath came fast. "We didn't just claim the relics." He looked at each of them in turn, realization sinking in. "We became them." The silence that followed was heavy. Stella shook her head, her silver eyes clouded with uncertainty. "We're just students. How are we supposed to protect something this big?" Fenn's gaze softened. The founders were once just students too. That didn't make the weight on their shoulders feel any lighter. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his thoughts. If the magic has changed, does that mean the Reapers are? A sharp crack split through the air. The temple shuddered violently, and without warning, the relics began to glow, too bright, too fast, asterisk. The golden light around them twisted, flickering into something darker, something asterisk, wrong asterisk. The chime in Stella's hands vibrated wildly. Flora gasped as the stone beneath her pulsed, shaking her very bones. Alexander felt a ripple in the air around him, the water reacting as if suddenly tainted. And then, a deep, cold asterisk laughter asterisk filled the temple. It slithered through the air, curling around them like smoke. And though the voice did not belong to Morgana, its presence was far, far worse. Did you think you were the only ones who could awaken? The shadows around them coiled, thickening, asterisk, pulling themselves into something tangible, asterisk. A form began to take shape. Not Morgana, not a reaper. Something else, something older. Fen stepped forward, his usually unshakable expression darkening with something they had never seen before. Fear. This cannot be, he murmured. The darkness was never meant to rise again. The figure in the shadows chuckled, low and amused. And yet, it said, stepping forward, here I am. A single step, and the torches in the temple flickered violently. Another, and the relics trembled in their hands. Marcus clenched his jaw, his flames flickering to life once more. Who are you? The figure tilted its head, as though considering the question. Then, in a voice as ancient as time itself, it answered, I am the one your founders feared. I am the one they buried beneath their magic. A slow, twisted smile curled on the shadow's lips. And I have been waiting for you. A cold dread settled over them. The founders had left behind their magic, their knowledge, their relics, but they had also left behind their greatest mistake. And now the past had returned, not as a whisper, not as a warning, but as asteriska, reckoning asterisk. The air inside the temple turned thick, pressing against them like an invisible force, suffocating and ancient. The shadowed figure loomed before them, its form shifting between solid and smoke, as though reality itself couldn't decide what it was. The relics trembled in their hands. Magic, old and untamed, surged around them, reacting not to their presence, but to his asterisk. Marcus clenched his fists, his flames flaring defiantly. You still haven't answered the question. His voice was steady, but his pulse thundered in his ears. Who are you? The figure's laughter was slow, deliberate, as if savoring the moment. I have been called many things, it mused, taking a step forward. With each movement, the torches flickered erratically, as though struggling against his presence. But the founders knew me by one name. The shadows coiled, the temple walls groaned. The Hollow King, a chill ran through them, colder than any winter. Flora's fingers dug into the smooth stone relic. That name, she whispered. I've seen it before, in the restricted section of the library, buried in a text about the dark ages of magic. Alexander inhaled sharply, realization dawning in his eyes. He wasn't just feared, he murmured. He was erased. The Hollow King chuckled, amused by their understanding. Ah, so you are not entirely ignorant. His voice slithered through the air like silk laced with poison. Yes, your founders tried to erase me, to bury my name beneath centuries of silence. But magic remembers. His silver eyes, if they could be called eyes at all, gleamed in the dim light. And now, so shall you. The temple shook violently. The relics in their hands pulsed, reacting against the force of his presence. They weren't just artifacts. They were barrier asterisk, a prison, and it was failing. Stella swallowed hard. If the founders locked you away, then that means. The Hollow King's smile widened. That means you are the ones who set me free asterisk. The realization hit like a thunderclap. Their victory over Morgana hadn't been the end. It had been the key. The energy they had unleashed, the light that had surged through the temple. The balance they had restored, it had done more than just awaken their powers. It had asterisk broken, the final seal asterisk, and the Hollow King had been waiting for exactly that. The rise of the Hollow King, asterisk. The darkness around him moved, shifting and expanding, stretching toward the relics, as if hungry to reclaim what had once been his. Marcus stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "I don't care how old you are," he growled. "We're not letting you walk out of here." The Hollow King's amusement did not fade. "How bold," he murmured, tilting his head as if considering Marcus for the first time. "You carry the flame of Gryffindor, a spark of power, but reckless, predictable." His gaze drifted to Alexander. "And you, the tide of Slytherin, cold, calculating." Alexander's grip on his relic tightened, but he said nothing. The Hollow King turned to Flora. The earth of Hufflepuff, stubborn, unyielding, and yet still so fragile. Flora held her ground, even as the stone beneath her trembled. Finally, his gaze landed on Stella. "And the wind of Ravenclaw," he mused, "ever-changing. But knowledge alone will not save you from what comes next." Stella shivered, but she did not look away. Then slowly, he exhaled, his form shifting once more. The shadows that clung to him twisted, dark tendrils stretching toward the relics. "The power you hold," he said, voice deepening, "was once mine." A pulse of magic slammed asterisk through the chamber, knocking them backward. The relics burned against their palms, resisting the Hollow King's pull. But they were losing. The darkness surged forward, and then an asterisk flash asterisk of golden light erupted between them. The relics flared in unison, their magic intertwining, pushing against the shadows. The temple walls glowed, runes igniting along the ancient stone. The Hollow King hissed, retreating slightly, his form wavering. Marcus pushed himself up. His chest burned, but not from pain, from asterisk power asterisk. He turned to the others. "We stopped Morgana by coming together," he said. "We have to do it again." Flora nodded, planting her feet. "The relics don't belong to him anymore. They belong to us," Alexander finished. Stella lifted her hands, the wind swirling around her. "Then, let's remind him why the founders locked him away. The four of them raised the relics as one. The temple answered, asterisk. A surge of asterisk, pure elemental magic asterisk burst outward. The forces of fire, earth, air, and water intertwining, no longer separate, but one. The Hollow King snarled as the light engulfed him, his form thrashing against the power. For the first time, his voice carried something other than amusement. Rage. You cannot hold me forever, he bellowed, his shadowy limbs clawing at the temple walls. The balance has already shifted. The world has already begun to change. The relics burned asterisk, brighter asterisk. The magic wrapping around him like chains reforged. The air crackled with energy as the Hollow King's form collapsed asterisk, folding inward, pulled back into the prison he had nearly escaped. With a final, furious asterisk, scream asterisk, he asterisk vanished asterisk. The temple shuddered asterisk, and then fell silent. The aftermath. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The relics dimmed, settling into their hands, their power no longer pulsing wildly, but steady. The golden runes along the temple walls faded, the torches returning to their normal glow. The Hollow King was gone. For now, Fen stepped forward at last, his expression unreadable. It is done. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. So, did we just fix things? Fen's silver eyes met his. No. A heavy pause. You did not fix the world, the centaur said slowly. You asterisk changed it. Flora exchanged a glance with Stella, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. What does that mean? Alexander asked warily. Fen exhaled. The Hollow King is bound once more, but the magic of the world has already shifted. What you have done here tonight will not simply fade. His gaze swept over them, lingering on the relics. And neither will you. A weight settled over them. Marcus turned to the temple entrance, where the first rays of dawn were beginning to break through the mist. Hogwarts was waiting. The world was waiting, and they were no longer just students. They were something else now, something new, the first elemental guardians in 1,000 years. And whether they were ready or not, their story was just beginning asterisk. The first light of dawn spilled through the temple's entrance, bathing the ancient chamber in gold. The weight of the night's battle still clung to the air, but the silence that followed was not just emptiness. It was change. Marcus stood at the threshold, his grip still firm around the brazier relic, its flames now steady, unwavering. His heart pounded with the realization that this wasn't just another victory. It was a beginning. Flora, her palms still resting on the smooth stone relic, could feel the world humming beneath her fingertips, as though the very earth had been rewritten. Alexander's hands curled instinctively, sensing the moisture in the air, the weight of the ocean beyond the forest. Stella inhaled slowly, the wind around her shifting in response to her breath, as natural as if it had always been a part of her. They were different now, and so was the world. Fen stood beside them, his silver eyes unreadable. "You have done what no one before you could," he said, his voice softer than they had ever heard it. "You have bound the elements to yourselves, and in doing so, you have ensured that the Hollow King remains contained." Marcus swallowed, for now. Fen's silence was answer enough. Stella turned, her expression clouded with uncertainty. "If Morgana was just a piece of something larger, then we've only delayed the inevitable. The balance has shifted," Fen admitted. "And not just within you. The entire magical world has felt this awakening, whether they understand it or not. Wizards, creatures, even the very land itself. No." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Then they'll come looking for us. Some to learn," Flora murmured. "Some to control." Marcus let out a breath, rubbing his temples. "Fantastic. So, what now? Do we just go back to Hogwarts and pretend everything's fine?" Fen's gaze darkened slightly. "Hogwarts is no longer just your home. It is your *** stronghold, ***. A heavy pause. "You are the first elemental guardians in 1,000 years," Fen continued. "The world will look to you for answers. Some will call you heroes. Others will fear what you have become." Stella's fingers tightened around the chime relic. "And the Reapers, they will return," Fen said. "In new forms, new faces. They may not be your greatest threat anymore, but there will always be those who seek to control what they do not understand." Silence stretched between them. Flora ran a hand over the smooth surface of the stone relic, grounding herself. "We don't have all the answers yet," she admitted. "But we can't just walk away from this." Alexander exhaled. "Then we start preparing." Marcus gave a half smirk. "Let's be honest, none of us were ever going to sit still anyway." Fen nodded approvingly. "Then your path is set." The relics pulsed in response, as if acknowledging the decision that had been made. For a long moment, none of them spoke, only listening to the sound of the wind in the trees, the soft crackle of Marcus's embers, the distant rush of unseen water. The balance between them was undeniable now. They were not just 4 students. They were fire and water, earth and air, guardians of a forgotten magic. Hash returned to Hogwarts. The walk back to the castle was different this time. The forest no longer felt like a place of mystery, but a living entity, shifting around them in quiet acknowledgement. Creatures watched from the shadows, some bowing their heads, others vanishing before they could be seen. Even the ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse faintly, as though whispering its approval. When they reached the castle gates, Hogwarts itself felt ***, changed ***. It was subtle at first, the way the enchanted torches flickered brighter, the way the very air seemed ***, aware ***. The ancient stones of the castle walls hummed faintly beneath Flora's fingertips, and as they stepped onto the bridge, leading into the courtyard. Stella could swear she felt the wind greet her like an old friend. Waiting for them at the entrance stood Professor McGonagall, ***. Her sharp eyes swept over them, taking in their exhaustion, the quiet power that now surrounded them. But there was no shock on her face, only quiet understanding. "You have returned," she said simply. Marcus hesitated, expecting questions, a lecture, something. But McGonagall simply studied the relics in their hands and then nodded. "You should know," she continued, "that the moment you stepped beyond the gates, Hogwarts felt your magic. The castle knew." Flora shifted. Did anyone else? McGonagall's lips thinned. "The Ministry has already sent inquiries. They know something has happened." Marcus groaned. "Fantastic." McGonagall's gaze softened, ever so slightly. "Change is rarely welcomed with open arms, Mr. Flamel, but it is inevitable." She took a step forward, looking at each of them in turn. "You are no longer just students. Whether you wished for it or not, history has chosen you." Stella swallowed. "Then what do we do now?" McGonagall exhaled. "Now," she glanced toward the castle. "Now you rest." She turned, leading them inside. And as they stepped through the grand doors, the warm glow of Hogwarts welcomed them home. For the first time in what felt like forever, they breathed ***. For tonight, at least, the battle was over. A world awakens. But beyond the walls of Hogwarts, far from the warmth of the castle, the *** world stirred ***. In the shadows of forgotten ruins, unseen figures whispered among themselves, their voices urgent. In the depths of the ocean, something vast shifted, its slumber disturbed by the ripple of ancient power. And deep within the forbidden forest, beneath the roots of the oldest trees, a single rune carved in stone, one that had remained dormant for centuries, began to * glow once more. The magic of the elements had returned, and so had the secrets that had been buried with it. For Marcus, Stella, Flora, and Alexander, their journey was just beginning, and somewhere in the darkness, unseen but waiting, a voice whispered, "Balance is temporary. The Hollow King will rise again."